Hello and welcome. Has Yemen gone over the brink, or could the deteriorating situation be turned around to stop the country from becoming a failed state? Yemen has come sharply into focus as America addresses its security concerns following the failed airline attack in Detroit on Christmas Day. The security breach highlighted the growing presence in Yemen of Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, which claimed credit for planning the attack. The group is also believed to have assassinated several key security officials in recent months. Well, the latest concerns about Yemen's stability and security come on top of the country's ongoing conflict involving two unrelated separatist movements. One of these is on the northern border with Houthi rebels, while the southern part of the country is facing a secessionist movement. Human rights groups have accused Yemen of being heavy-handed in using inappropriate and lethal force in dealing with these conflicts, creating a refugee crisis in the process. Yemen is also an oil-dependent economy facing collapse, with unemployment at nearly 40%, a water supply that's rapidly disappearing, and a challenging population surge. On today's show we ask, is Yemen on the verge of becoming a failed state, and how could increased pressure from the United States affect the country's future? Remember, you can join our conversation with your questions and comments. You can send an SMS or email, and we'll welcome your phone calls onto the show as well. Joining me now to discuss this is the former U.S. Ambassador to Yemen, Barbara Bodine. Ambassador Bodine is currently a lecturer at Princeton's Woodrow Wilson School of Public and International Affairs, where she focuses on the Middle East. Also with us is Dr. Christopher Bosek, an associate at the Carnegie Endowment's Middle East program, where his work focuses on regional security challenges in the Gulf. I welcome you both to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ambassador, if I could start with you. How long before Yemen does get labeled a failed state?
I don't think we know when it will actually reach that stage, and I hope it actually doesn't. It is a very fragile state, and it's been on the verge of being a failed state for a number of decades. Your own setup listed the problems that they face, and they're very real, and they're almost intractable. But it doesn't actually have to get to that point. I think the question is, do we take steps that push it to that brink, that verge of becoming failed, or do we actually take steps that support it and help it stay on the right side of the failure curve? It won't be a prosperous state, but it doesn't have to fail.
We listed a number of the challenges,
Yes.
from the secessionist movement, the insurgencies,
Absolutely.
and so on. Which do you feel should be the priority? What does Yemen's government need to tackle first to make sure it does take the right steps to not failing?
Right. Well, we can't provide more water. We can't create water that isn't there, and we can't create oil that isn't there. But we can work with the Yemenis on human capacity and state capacity. A state structure that can deliver the limited resources they have, but at least deliver them well. In essence, to help the state extend its legitimacy further into the country, not just work on extending its authority. I think that if we do the latter and we ignore the former, then all of those problems. But I would work on human capacity development and state capacity development.
Dr. Bosek, good to have you here as well.
Thank you.
Now, I know you've written a number of articles on this, and you say it's important that the international community steps in before it is too late. What happens when it's too late, basically?
Well, I think one of the big problems, I think Ambassador Bodine brings this out very well, is we don't know what state failure or state collapse or what that's going to look like in Yemen. And I don't think we know what the triggers are that will lead to that are either. So if we're trying to come up with prescriptive policy measures, it's especially difficult if we don't know what we're trying to avoid or how it's going to come about.
I'm going to put a couple of emails to you, if I may, because our viewers have a chance to ask questions here, and we had some. So I'll put these to you, Dr. Bosek. First, the first one's in from Florida, from Selvin Cray, who wrote in saying, America's been trying to get a grip on Al-Qaeda for years. Why now do they think they have a better chance using the same failed tactics of yesterday? The second one's from a viewer by the name of Ansar Bakshi, who wrote in saying, if the US wants to help Yemen, it should focus on building vital institutions and infrastructure and not foment insurrection by spending billions in military aid. How do you regard that decision to increase aid?
Well, I think it's really important that we, in addition to the counterterrorism, kind of the sharp end of the stick, we need to keep in mind building on this state capacity, which I think is what's so important. Thinking about a post-oil economy, thinking about how to extend legitimacy and authority and capacity for the Yemeni government to do these things is key.
Well, Ambassador, one of the things that's being discussed is comparing Yemen to Afghanistan and Iraq, and saying America could be making the same mistake again and creating the same kind of environment, even perhaps a Somalia kind of environment. I mean, is it realistic to make those comparisons?
No. Yemen, and I think it's very important to draw the distinction. Yemen does not have the sectarian divides that Iraq suffered from. It doesn't have the history of warlords that Afghanistan has, or the ethnic divides. And it doesn't have the clan violence that Somalia has. I think we can learn a very important lesson from Iraq and Afghanistan, which we learned too late in both of those places, which is, again, we need to go back and work on state capacity and human capacity, putting the people first. If we do security first or security only, particularly if we do security only, then we are going to be in a situation of creating another Afghanistan or another Iraq. We have an opportunity with Yemen to get ahead of this. And to keep it from happening. It's preemptive post-conflict reconstruction.
Well, Dr. Bozek, what we do have here, though, is the growing presence of Al-Qaeda, or Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, as it's called now. And I wonder to what degree that you know, there is real evidence or real information on how big Al-Qaeda's presence has become in Yemen, and really how it's consolidated, apparently, with other factions that have sort of been drawn in.
I think that's a great question. I think, you know, the short answer is I think we don't know how big, you know, the Al-Qaeda presence is. We know there's a resurgent organization, an organization that's increasingly more media savvy and more theologically, making more theological arguments. We know there are a number of Saudis who have fled into Yemen to take advantage of this. But I think in terms of how big the presence is, I think we also need to differentiate between Islamists generally and on the spectrum where Al-Qaeda fits in on it, the violent Al-Qaeda brands. Islamists.
As we were answering that, we had from our live station chat room where people are discussing this, Vicky in Greece, who said, how credible are the accusations from the United States of Al-Qaeda's presence in Yemen, and how seriously, Ambassador, do you think that the US government is taking the approach to how to handle Al-Qaeda?
Well, I think the U.S. government is extremely serious about trying to handle the Al-Qaeda problem. There's been an Al-Qaeda presence in Yemen for at least 15 years, if not more. But traditionally, it was a warehousing of fairly low-level Al-Qaeda fighters. What's new is the Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula has an operational element to it. But I think a very important element to remember about this new organization, this makes it both more formidable, but I think also more we can address it, is it has a very large Saudi component to it. It's really the stapling together of two affiliates. And that means that it's not a wholly indigenous organization. That Saudi component is an important feature that we need to bear in mind as we try to figure out what to do.
Dr. Bozek, is there any chance I mean, how do you regard the rumors that there's a chance the Yemeni government has struck some kind of deal with Al-Qaeda to try to find some kind of balance?
Well, I think looking back, we see this is something they've tried to do. They've tried to negotiate and tried to co-opt people in the past. I think the events of the last 2 weeks really demonstrate, I think, to the Yemeni government that they want to be on the right side of this issue. And I think they're trying very hard to make sure they are.
We've got a caller on the line from the Netherlands. Abdel Nasser, thank you for being with us. What would you like to ask?
Thank you very much. My question is that is it possible for the international community to put more priority the safety and the security for the Yemen people? Because as we are aware, for the last week, Al-Qaeda group in Somalia, Al-Shabaab, was linked with Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. They said they have to support those who are in Yemen. So my point of view, is it possible for the international community to wrap it out for this Al-Qaeda affiliate group in Somalia as well as in Yemen?
Let me put that to the ambassador. Basically, it's what can the international community do to try to handle the Al-Qaeda situation in Yemen? And actually, it makes me want to ask not just the international community, but what about the regional community? The Arab world seems to be so absent in all of this.
I think that's a very good point. No one has brought up what the Arab world should be doing. They should be more involved. And I think it's an important point, Chris mentioned, that a number of the fighters in Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula fled from Saudi Arabia. And so while this problem has repercussions outside of Yemen, it also is a reflection of problems in the region, and I think that there should be greater cooperation on dealing with it. The international community, again, can work with Yemen on developing their counterterrorism capability. Absolutely, that's the first step. But I think where the international community, again, really can play a role, and perhaps this is what's going to come out of the London conference, is really, again, a strategic look at how do we keep Yemen from failing, and how do we keep it from failing economically, human terms.
Isn't there a danger that if this becomes just a US mission to sort out Yemen and to sort out Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, what ends up happening is it's more fuel for those who say America's interfering, America's basically dictating the rules, and again, it's greater recruiting material for Al-Qaeda.
Oh, absolutely. I think there's a great fear that, having this be an American project or an American mission, will fuel the grievances that feed into Al-Qaeda-style militancy. And there's not an American solution to what's going on in Yemen. There's an international approach that we can take to help make these things less bad, but we're not going to solve them.
And presumably, Ambassador, to some degree, the Yemeni government's preoccupied with its own issues, the Houthi rebels in the north and the secessionist movement in the south. In terms of how much impact those are having on Yemen's ability to maintain some kind of hold on its people, hold on the situation there, what is the result?
Yeah, I think that this is really the major threat that both the Al-Houthi rebellion in the north and the secessionists in the south pose. They're not really credible threats to the government in a direct sense, but they drain resources, they drain attention, they drain legitimacy, and they need to be dealt with for those very reasons. They have also, diverted Yemeni government attention from the Al-Qaeda fight. And the Yemeni government put the Al-Houthi rebellion at the top of their list. We wanted Al-Qaeda at the top of the list. Al-Qaeda is now there. But these are three different, unrelated, as you had in your setup, three unrelated security issues for a government with very, very limited resources and very limited capabilities. And they all have to be dealt with, but differently.
What about the secessionist movement in the south, Dr. Bosek? What about the danger that this could pose a major issue to the integrity of Yemen?
Oh, definitely. And I think the regime has looked at the civil war in Sada or the secessionist movement as existential issues, regime-ending issues, and whereas Al-Qaeda has not been a first-order priority. And I think Ambassador Bodine makes this great point that the resources that are being devoted to these other issues cannot be sustained. And I think the great untold story of the civil war in Sada is how it's rapidly accelerating the economic collapse in Yemen. The amount of money being spent that the Yemenis should be spending on other issues is really catastrophic.
We'll touch on more of these in just a moment. We have to take a very short break here. We're back with more of our discussion in a moment. Don't go away.